Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into effective unit planning. This session will guide you through the process, explain why it matters, and provide research-based best practices to help you plan instruction that is intentional, coherent, and aligned to student needs. By the end of this session, you will have practical strategies to plan units that improve student learning and outcomes. A little bit about me. My name is Jessica Vasta. I've taught everything from elementary to middle school and even special education. I have the absolute privilege of working as a new teacher instructional coach, supporting all new teachers in best practices. I've had 12 years in education and I'm originally from upstate New York. However, I've done all of my teaching in Arizona. I currently hold several degrees. I hold a general education degree and a special education degree and a master's in educational leadership. But the role that I love most, that brings me the most joy, is that I am the mom to three beautiful boys. Today's agenda is we're going to look at our learning targets and success criteria. We're always going to set the purpose for why is this important? Why do we need to know this? Which brings us to our why. And then we're going to look at mapping out your quarter, looking at assessments, a lot of backwards design. And then we're going to touch on standards deconstruction. I did do a full video of how to deconstruct a standard, and I do suggest looking at that video prior to walking through this one. After that, we're going to put it all together, and then we're going to talk about research-based practices and key takeaways. Okay, our learning targets and success criteria. So our learning target is I can design an effective unit plan by using a structured process that includes mapping the quarter, analyzing assessments, and deconstructing standards and planning aligned instruction. I'll know that I'm successful when I can successfully map my quarter, analyze assessments, deconstruct standards, and align my instruction. And then take a second, please, to review the infographic in the lower left. Unit planning is more than just writing lesson plans. Its purpose is to create coherent, intentional instruction across the entire unit and ensures alignment between standards, assessments, and your students' needs. Effective planning reduces last-minute stress and allows for differentiation so that all students receive instruction that they need to be successful. Essentially, unit planning allows us to be proactive rather than reactive. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits from unit planning is that when you map ahead of time, you're giving yourself the roadmap for where you're going as you go through your unit and the stops you need to make along the way. And one of the benefits I found as a teacher when I did this is that when I did my weekly lesson planning, it was so much faster because I'd already given myself the mile markers and the roadmap for what needed to be taught. And really, the only thing I had to do week to week was gather my resources. So that's what I'm hoping you see as a benefit by the end of this. So why unit planning? Why is unit planning considered the best practice? Well, first of all, it clarifies learning goals, which is the foundation of backwards design by Wiggins and McTighe. Second, it aligns assessment, instruction, and pacing to improve student outcomes. And third, it supports the equity by ensuring that every student has access to essential content. And finally, it helps us identify gaps, redundancies, and scaffolding opportunities so that instruction can be purposeful and effective. So we're going to map out your quarter. So I'm going to give you the overview of what mapping out looks like, and then we're going to walk through what it physically and visually looks like. So firstly, you're going to determine your available instructional time. You're going to review your school calendar, block out holidays, testing windows, and special events. And we're going to talk about, even if Valentine's Day is a holiday, but you still have school, why you need to be aware of that. And we're going to chart what our actual teaching days are for the unit. That's going to give us our quick and dirty of how many days do I have allotted in this quarter for this unit, or for if we have multiple units per quarter for this section. We're going to align time with standards. when you go to a district, very often either it already comes with the curriculum or your district has a team that writes curriculum and provides what's called a curriculum overview or curriculum guide. And oftentimes it lists out the standards that are covered and will note suggested time allotments to how long you should spend on that standard for pacing. And we're going to note what those recommended days are per standard. And to keep in mind, we're going to do this again during standards deconstruction, but you want to note the standards that have already been taught in previous quarters, and which standards are coming out for the first time, because standards that are brand new to students are going to be the ones that we spend the most time to really teach towards. And standards that have already been spiraled or that students have already seen in this year, we're probably going to review and move more quickly through. So some things to consider. So here I have a blank calendar. And like I said in previous videos, I'm very much a paper and pencil person. So you can go on Canva, you can go on Google and find just a blank calendar, oftentimes one you have to fill in the days for. And you're giving yourself kind of a visual for the map. So this first step in unit planning, you want to begin by determining your actual instructional days. You want to look at your school calendar, block out holidays. So here it was February, we have President's Day. Your district might have half days because you have staff meetings for part of the day. The district that I work in, all of our half days are on a Wednesday. And it's really important to note that because your daily schedule is reduced. And if you're working through your unit, you might decide, hey, I normally have 45 minutes to work on this. Now I've got 20. I can't do my full-fledged instruction the way I want to on those days. So this day is going to be a catch-up day, or if a lesson ran over, it's going to be the day that I finish up a lesson. So kind of knowing what the purpose of these days look like for you. And then again, we talked previously. So this is Valentine's Day. We have school on Valentine's Day. And by no means does it mean that we aren't having an instructional day. But if you teach elementary school or even some middle school, you know that there are things that occur on that day that makes your instructional time shortened or look different. And so it's a lot easier to know that those are coming up rather than be planning the day before and go, oh no, it's Valentine's Day and we have this party and I have a 45-minute lesson that needs to be taught. We really want to look for all of the instructional obstacles that could be. And so we're going to plan those days out. Next, so before jumping into the actual lesson planning, it's helpful to take a quick look at those unit guides that I talked about. And again, that might already come in your curriculum, or that might be something that your district puts together. And you want to think of this as like the roadmap of your unit. And it shows you the mile markers that we're going to stop along the way. Those So the unit guide gives us the big picture, including the standards, essential questions, key skills, vocabulary, and pacing. It's a great at-a-glance document that you can use when mapping out your quarter. It helps us focus on the most important learning goals rather than just getting lost in individual activities, which tends to happen because we want to be purposeful in our instruction and not just filled with activities. They also help us save time because they often include resources such as suggested pacing, which is the example me and AI kind of gave for you. This is often what it looks like for my school district. And then we're not starting from scratch. Most importantly, using unit guides keep our planning focused, aligned, and consistent across classrooms. A quick review at the beginning can make the whole unit come together much more smoothly. Because when you're aligned to your district's understanding of what the pacing looks like, then everybody's on the same page. And so those assessments that your district has required you to use, either district made or brought to you by a curriculum company, then everybody is on the same pacing and you're meeting those milestones to be able to have your students take the assessment successfully. Okay, the next up is assessment. And this one is going to be really important. And I think you should even pause it and go back and listen because there's multiple steps into this. It requires you to pull the end of unit assessment and have it printed out. Get those colored pens, get those colored highlighters because you're going to be annotating and analyzing and making notes on it. And it's going to really guide a large portion of our unit planning. So our next step is assessment analysis. Review your formative and summative assessments and label each question with the standard it addresses. Identify which standards are emphasized the most and which questions students may find challenging. I'm going to stop right there. So you're going to go through your assessment several times. The first time you look through your assessment, you're just reading the questions and aligning it to what standard it's referring to. Okay, so you want to have that pacing guide that shows the standards that are taught to that unit and your assessment next to you. And you're checking off like, yep, this is RL1 or this is RL4. And what we're doing there is we're seeing what standard is assessed the most. And just for ELA teachers, oftentimes the standard that we see a lot is RI and RL1, that evidence-based question, right? And so we're not going to teach to the test, but we're going to plan instruction thoughtfully and purposefully so that students are fully equipped to handle those questions. What we often notice with assessments is that like poetry is kind of thrown in there with like one question. And then there's like author's purpose that comes up a lot more. So we want to be aware of what our big buck standards are, the ones that are going to give us the big bang for our buck, if you will. We also want to look at our benchmark data and the standards. For instance, author's purpose tends to be a really difficult standard for students because they're looking at the purpose of the author, where oftentimes the id or the ego of the student will often try to answer it based on their purpose or their view of the story. So this is a time where we want to take note of what standards are challenging for students when we're also labeling them. Next, we're going to evaluate question format. So what types of questions is our assessment asking our students, such as star style questions, multi-select versus multiple choice questions? Are there graphics? Are there graphic organizers that they have to fill in? Is there text evidence based? Is there drag and drop? Is there a drop down box? Then we're going to rate each question from a 1 to 4. 1 being like student ability is low. 4 being my students could do this, not a problem. And the reason why we want to do that is sometimes students can have the content knowledge, but when they're given a question format that they've never seen before, like a drop-down box or a drag and drop, they may get that question wrong just because they don't know how to navigate that format. And we can see that a lot when new testing formats are introduced to schools for the first time. We very often go over multiple choice, short response, and true false questions in classrooms. But some of those more unique tech-based question formats like drag and drop, fill in the blank, drop-down boxes, where students may be less familiar with, sometimes they get those wrong just based on their inability to navigate the formatting. And we don't want kids to get things wrong just because they don't or are not familiar. And that's why we have a rating system. You want to rate between that 1 and that 4, either for format or for standard knowledge. So if it's a content knowledge question that I think they can answer, like an RL1, but the format is brand new and something we haven't done in class, I would probably give that a 2 and make a note to myself that I want to go back and teach that type of formatted question. Whereas if it were a multiple choice question and an RL1, I'd be like, yep, my students know how to answer that. So this might be, I tried to generate what some questions assessments might look like. So here we have a multiple choice, we have a short response, and we have a matching. Like I said before, multiple choice and short response tend to be highly navigated question types that we use in the classroom, but matching may not. So before we start planning lessons for a unit, it's really important to take a few minutes to look closely at the end of unit assessments. This helps us clearly to see what students will ultimately be expected to know and do. When we analyze the assessment first, it helps make sure that our instruction, standards, and assessments are all aligned. We can see the types of questions students will answer and the level of thinking that's required, and the skills that they need to practice along the way. It also helps us notice important vocabulary, concepts, and task types the students will encounter, and also know that this ahead of time allows us to build on opportunities for our students to practice those skills during the unit instead of surprising them at the end. And we say it for the people in the back. We want to provide students the ability to practice those skills during the unit instead of surprising them at the end. We want to identify those obstacles for students, whether it's certain content-specific vocabulary, question formatting, or rubrics that they haven't come into contact with. And we want to start embedding those into our instructional lessons, our mini lessons. I'm not saying we do a mini lesson on how to take an assessment, but if we know that there's going to be matching or drop-down boxes, then when I start teaching a skill and I do my formative assessments, I'm going to start embedding drop-down questions into their little formative assessments that I create. I'm going to start going over how to ensure that I click the box, click out, and then scroll so that when I scroll, the mouse isn't still within the drop-down box. That's a common mistake. So I'm going to start thinking of all those things while I'm analyzing my assessment. Ultimately, taking the time to review an assessment, it helps to plan with a purpose. Pace your instruction and make sure that we are truly preparing students for success in all aspects. It's a simple step that can make a big difference of how effectively your unit comes together. Okay, so this is the time again. I said I've done a video on standards deconstruction. We're going to go over it quick. If you want a more in-depth version, I suggest going to the standard deconstruction video. So, but standard deconstruction is so crucial for the clarity of the instruction. Often we think that we know what a standard requires when we read it quick, but often deconstructing it helps us identify the exact cognitive demand. It takes our knowledge from being vague and surface level to deep and purposeful. We're going to start by identifying the academic verbs that analyze, infer, compare, explain, and define exactly what students must do with those verbs. So where and how are they applying them? We're going to break down the knowledge into the skills that are necessary to reach mastery. Finally, determine if each skill requires direct teaching, review, or reteaching. And this step helps to ensure that instruction meets the standard to its fullest depth and rigor. And that standard deconstruction looks like this. So really quickly, what you do is you pull out the standards that are being taught in the unit. And for each individual standard, you're going to follow these steps. You're going to get out your colorful pens again. You're going to look at your highlighters and you're going to assign a color to the do and assign a color to the what. So the do is our cognitive verb. What are students actively doing in their brains and also overtly. So they're going to be citing, analyzing, and inferring. And we want to list those in our box here. Then you're going to be aligning it to, well, what are they doing it with? So when they're citing, what are they citing? They're citing textual evidence, and not just any textual evidence. They're citing relevant textual evidence. What are they analyzing? They're analyzing what the text says explicitly, okay? And then from there, you're going to start scaffolding. And what I mean by that is you're going to think of the fundamental foundational skills that students have to do or know how to do to cite, the foundational skills and concept that they need to know how to do to analyze. We're breaking the standard into smaller pieces every single time. So when I cite textual evidence, do my students know how to find text evidence? If they do they know how to determine what the best or the most relevant evidence is? Let's say that they do. Do they know how to cite it properly? This is a sixth grade literature standard. So they have to know how to paraphrase or do a direct quote. And we very much live in the world where students are on their iPads and they're copying and pasting and they're not doing a proper direct quote. And then lastly, if they paraphrase or if they cite or use a direct quote, do they know how to do embedded cite text citations? We have to start thinking about what are the prerequisite skills for our students to be successful in every part of meeting the standard. Once we've known that, we're going to look at our benchmark data and our anecdotal knowledge of our students, and we're going to think to ourselves, what is our student ability in the scaffolded section? So talking about finding text evidence, is this something brand new that they've never seen before? Probably not, because reading standards follow a vertical alignment and build on each other from year to year to year. And they've been working on using text evidence since about second or third grade. So I'm not going to need to reteach this or direct teach it, but I probably do need to review what the sixth grade expectations are for identifying text evidence. Then I'm going to looking at determining the best text evidence. And there we're getting a little bit more refined in our text finding abilities. And we're going to need to apply our close reading strategies. And this isn't going to be something that's new per se, but this might be something that I need to show the students how I would like them to do at a sixth grade level. And so that might be like a reteach, because I'm not teaching it for the first time to them. Paraphrasing I have underneath there as a reteach, but depending on how our students do on benchmarks and how much they struggle with this, they might need a direct teach. And the reason why I would choose direct teach is because when we directly teach something, we're modeling and we're doing a think aloud. And the benefit of think aloud is that you are explaining the cognitive process that their brain should be going through when they're paraphrasing. And that's a really powerful skill when we see that students are really struggling. So that's just a quick and dirty version of how to do a standards deconstruction. Again, I do suggest going back to that other video if you would like more of a guided practice. Now we're going to put it all together. We've isolated our instructional days. We've looked at our standard pacing. We've identified how standards will be assessed in the assessments. And we've broken down our standards and evaluated where our students are as far as being able to master those standards. So what does it look like now? Now we're going to integrate all the steps, align your deconstructed standards to the text, activities, and tasks so that each learning experience targets a specific skill. We're going to provide practice in multiple formats to support mastery. So that's where we're going to align all those different question formats on the assessment into our instruction and our mini lessons. We're going to plan lessons using the gradual release model, introduce, model, practice, and student apply. We're going to embed scaffolds based on what you identified during the assessment analysis. And finally, we're going to teach test taking skills in context, expose students to unfamiliar formats, model thinking for complex items, and give them the practice with multiple step or multi-select questions. This prepares students for assessment success while reinforcing their skills. What does that look like on paper, right? So here we have our blank calendar. And here, this would be I'm envisioning so many colors, so many writing, because you have analyzed and annotated your assessment. You've identified the standards they're aligned to, identify the challenges that students might have. Here, you're going to have your standards and the pacing, and you're going to have deconstructed your standards, and I've identified what needs to be taught and how it needs to be taught. And that happened in your scaffold and your review, reteach, and direct teach. So what that looks like is I'm first going to take my pacing guide for my standards. And here I have that RL1 should be taught over 15 days. And so what I did here is I just labeled, this is going to be an RL1 day, RL1 day. This is a half day. This is going to be my makeup day, my get ahead day. And I'm going to keep going. And the reason why that's so important is I'm still planning on teaching a full lesson on Valentine's Day, but I might utilize this Wednesday to maybe get a little ahead. So to kind of plan for the obstacle of time for any kind of Valentine's Day activity or party. And then I have my no school. So then I'm going to have my RL day here, here, and here. I might really utilize this half day to get caught up from this missed day, and so on. So we're just mapping out the length in which we're pacing out the standard. Next, this is when your map becomes super helpful to you. So we've deconstructed our standards, we're breaking them down, and we've identified our reteach, review, and so on. And so that's when I start looking at the scaffolding section of my standard deconstruction and my review reteach. So here, I'm going to review how to find text evidence, which I've already indicated here. The very first step in citing textual evidence is being able to identify text evidence. And when I thought about my class, I identified that as a review. And to me, a review only takes a day, a half a day of instruction for that. And then the next day, I might review quickly how to find text evidence and then go into a guided practice, a we do, if you will, using a text. Next, I'm going to move on to my next scaffolded, which is how to find the best text evidence. And I have that as a reteach, but that, like I said, that could even be a direct teach if I feel that my students are struggling with it, and I might need to do a real think aloud. And then we're going into paraphrasing. What does it mean to analyze? So I'm grouping some of these scaffolds together so that when I look at my week's worth of lessons, I can plan and gather materials to really hit these goals. So again, these are driving my instructional practice. I'm no longer planning activities, but I'm planning instructional practices so that my students can work towards achieving these goals. I'm going to be very purposeful in finding my literature and how I use it. And as we go through, if you look, I have what needs to be directly taught, what needs to be reviewed. And then partway through, I'm going to assess all of my students' ability to just cite textual evidence and paraphrase it. So I'm going to assess their first milestone of being able to master this standard. And then I'm going to move on to the next run, which is analysis and inferencing. And then I'm going to assess it. Okay. So I'm doing those formative checks along the way so that when they get to their summative assessment, I know exactly what they're going to do. And you can do this for every standard and map out your entire rest of your quarter. And it'll be such a helpful resource when you do your week to week lesson planning, because you already have those driving factors and you already know what milestones that you need to hit for that week. So the research behind these practices, this process is grounded in so much research. Backwards design encourages us to plan assessments first, then instruction, which clarifies mastery goals before teaching. So by analyzing those pre-made assessments from district or curriculum, you're analyzing what the end goal in mind is to inform your instruction. High quality instruction materials provide coherence and progression aligned to standards. Data-driven instruction informs pacing and interventions, while scaffolding and gradual release allows us to meet students where they are and gradually build their independence. Consistency and predictability reduce cognitive load, allowing students to focus on learning and retention. Following these best practices ensures that the unit planning translates into effective and purposeful teaching. To conclude, effective unit planning provides clarity, coherence, and student outcomes, aligning with standard assessments and daily lessons that are critical. Standard deconstruction ensures what we teach the right cognitive depth and rigor. Finally, continuous review, intentional scaffolding, and assessment-aligned instructions, they're not optional. They are core components of high-quality teaching. Effective unit planning is not just an organizational task. It is foundational for providing all students with meaningful, rigorous, and aligned instruction. Remember, when we plan intentionally, we teach intentionally, and students achieve more. Unit planning is proactive strategy that allows us to provide high quality instruction for every student in every unit.